It's my great pleasure to introduce today Chris Anstey, a three-time NBL champion, two-time Olympian. He's competed in the NBA, in Russia and in Spain. At 7 foot or 213 centimetres tall, Chris has competed in some of the world's most competitive basketball leagues and been one of Australia's most successful ever basketballers. Through his storied career, he's learnt the importance of team culture, he's learnt the importance of leadership in a range of different cultural contexts and environments. Chris, welcome.
Thank you. What a great intro.
You are, as I said, one of Australia's greatest ever basketballers, no doubt about that. But you actually came very late to the sport. In fact, you spent your early years, your teen years, among other things, playing tennis with Mark Philippoussis, with the Essendon footballer Dustin Fletcher. Really interesting story that. How did you come to basketball?
By fluke. I did from the time I was very young, and as long as I can remember, I was a tennis player. And Dustin and I laughed when he became a football player and I became a basketball player early days. He obviously had very quick success, winning a premiership with the Baby Bombers, and we laughed that Essendon had a tennis player as a fullback, and then the Melbourne Tigers had a tennis player as a backup centre. But I found the game honestly through my younger brother. He came into my bedroom one night, asked me if I wanted to fill in for his team at Keilor Basketball Stadium, to which I said no. He had mum convince me that it would be the brotherly thing to do to help out my little brother, and
playing the mum card.
Played the mum card, and the 5-minute drive up, he had to explain the rules. I'd never seen it before.
You didn't even know the rules.
Didn't know the rules. Had never watched a game. Never.
That
shot
would be
a
a bit
basketball.
unusual because most kids growing up in the sort of late 80s, early 90s would have had some idea at least of the rules.
Yeah, look, AFL, tennis, racing, these type of things. It was never on my radar. So, I got to the stadium, and the instruction I'd been given was pretty much, we know you can run, we know you can jump and catch. Run from basket to basket and put your hands up. If you're on defence, keep them up. And if you're on offence, put them up and we'll try to throw it to you, which I was able to do and scored 52 points. What I didn't know...
52 points 52 in your first game?
In my first game.
Okay.
What I didn't know was that, a very ordinary game, obviously, but...
52 points, 52 points, Chris.
It's still my career high. It was all downhill.
Did they tell you that you peaked in your first game?
There was a guy from the Melbourne Tigers Junior Basketball Club at the game who took him a few weeks to find me after that because he did his research and came up with nothing. Tracked me down and invited me to come and work out and see what it looked like at the Melbourne Tigers Junior Basketball Club.
Fabulous. So that's an amazing story. Were there any regrets? Because you just said you spent a bit of time playing AFL, playing tennis. Did you ever think, had I chosen the tennis route? Had I chosen the AFL?
Look, I probably still love tennis as much as any other sport and always try to find a way to get back involved with it. But look, obviously I'm built for basketball. I realised towards the end of my junior tennis career that players that I used to be able to beat, and some comfortably, were either catching up or had gone past me. So the writing was on the wall, and Dustin and I always had better doubles results than what we had individually in singles. So lost my doubles partner, realised that I wasn't as good a singles player as I would have liked, and it seemed that basketball was going to be a good fit. And on top of that, there was a really attractive element of competing in a team for the first time.
Okay. So in that team environment, did you have any sort of early mentors who stand out as being a really important influence on your very fledgling career, on your introduction to this new sport?
The guy who probably made me want to continue basketball was my first junior coach, and our coach's name was Des Middleton. His son was in the team, But by the time I went to the Melbourne Tigers, there were a couple of other clubs sniffing around, and I actually went down to Nunawading, and the coach at the time, a lot of ranting and raving, and so I said, jump in and do what the boys are doing, and that was my introduction to that club, and didn't even set foot on the floor, and I walked out the door. I said, I was just so intimidated, but Des was very different, where he took me out back, introduced himself, told the boys that this was going to take some time, that I was very new to the sport, and essentially made me feel welcome. And those 9 guys on the team, I catch up and speak to in various amounts now, but they've all become friends and confidants, and some still very close friends. And I think that was what kept me in the sport, the ability to feel connected to a team and to be able to move forward as a team.
Always important. So then in 1994, you joined, I think, what was, undoubtedly the premier franchise in Australian basketball, which was the Melbourne Tigers. You had Lindsay Gaze as coach, you had teammates like Andrew Gaze, like Mark Bradkey, like Leonard Copeland. That must have been a rush.
Yeah, it was. And you know what, probably not as much for me as someone who'd grown up watching the sport for a decade, and it was all very new, but I certainly had an understanding of how great they were by the time I found my way into the NBL program. And it was very quick. It was only 2.5 years after I started playing. So, I still remember watching particularly Mark Bradkey and Dave Simmons, because they were the guys who played my position, and watching them play or watching them develop their individual skills and thinking, I can actually do that. I think I can do that. But if I was to do it in a competitive environment, I'm just not strong enough, I'm not physical enough. And it really taught me early on that was going to be absolutely critical in my development, that I had to work on more than what was required on the court. I had to spend countless hours off the court with regard to diet, with regard to strength and conditioning, to even be able to compete, because I could have been the most skilled player in the world and not been able to play the game because I just couldn't compete physically. So I learnt that very, very early on, and took some steps towards that my first year, but didn't quite get it right. And it took me until I moved clubs to make sure I really had that as a point of emphasis.
Well, let's pick up the moving clubs. So just 1 year later, Southeast Melbourne Magic, Brian Gorigan, they stole you. And you were so new to the system. You'd only been there for 1 year. That must have been a real challenge for a young novice, if you like, into the NBL.
There's probably a beauty in naivety sometimes, and I just trusted my gut. We both used to train at the old Albert Park basketball stadium. The Tigers would be on the main court, and the Magic would be tucked away on court 9, which was right next door in a shoebox. And you see both teams train. You're obviously attached to the Tigers, and you see the Magic, and you saw the level of competitiveness and the level of training that they were doing every single day, and the youth in their program that they were developing. And you heard about the strength and conditioning, and you heard about the track work and all the extras that I was so far behind because I'd started so late, but I felt that I needed. And it was that was really attractive, because in my mind, if I wasn't going to improve, I might as well quit. So I had to find a way to continue to improve. And that was the obvious one, and it was the best decision I ever made. Brian Gorigan became the most influential person on my basketball career. I found myself with a group of 3 or 4 similar-aged basketball players wanting to go to the same place that I did, which made the journey a fraction easier, because we were able to bounce off each other, motivate each other. And the improvement I was able to make under Brian and the Magic, and Bruce Gray, who was our strength and conditioning guy and still is to this day, I went to levels I never expected to be able to go to.
And even then, your career just kept accelerating. So it was only 1997, I think, that you entered the NBA draft, straight off to Portland. Pick 17?
Pick 18.
Pick 18.
I never set foot in Portland. I was traded 10 minutes after they selected me, and it was a whirlwind. The 3 years at the Magic.
Traded to Dallas.
Traded to Dallas, yes.
Yes.
The 3 years were a whirlwind, and I was just finding my feet. And I suppose in a perfect world and on reflection, if I could have had another year as a pro that wasn't going to damage my ability to play in the NBA, which it could have, I would have loved to have spent that one more year and gone over even more physically competitive. But you can't say no to the NBA. And I went from being, I'd established myself as one of the better bigs in the NBL, and I felt that I could compete against anyone, to being thrown in the deep end and just being back to day one at Melbourne Tigers juniors again. I was that far behind, and really need to reinvent my game. I needed to teach myself to shoot. I needed to move better. I needed to have some perimeter skills, because 7 foot over there is just normal. 7 foot here is the tallest guy in the league. Every team's got 2 or 3, so you had to be able to stand out and evolve.
The leap the leap in quality, the leap in competitiveness, the leap in what was required of you day to day?
Yes, strength and athleticism, depth of talent, lack of culture insofar as if you weren't able to perform. Back here in Australia, the Magic had the best culture I'd been a part of. They take you aside, they help you, they nurture you, they mentor you. Yes. Over there, they cut you and bring someone else in. Yeah. So there really was that increased pressure to perform every single day, and if I wasn't going to do it on my own, nobody was going to do it for me. So that took some adjustment, and the spectacle of the NBA is incredible. The behind the scenes, it's a dogfight, and coming out of such a great culture and stepping into a dogfight in an NBA team that didn't win many games, it wasn't enjoyable. It wasn't as an enjoyable situation as probably many people would think, but it was an incredible learning experience.
How long did it take you to make that adjustment?
At least a good half a season, at least. Yeah. And even though you're able to make the adjustment, didn't mean you necessarily agreed with it or enjoyed it, but you found a way to get the most out of yourself in that environment. And probably it wasn't until the third year where it clicked that I needed someone. I'd been traded from the Mavs to Chicago, and I knew I needed someone else in my corner, and John Dorge had just become available and had some time, and I was on the phone to him and was able to have him agree to come over for the third season. It was a really beneficial step for my year in Chicago to have that extra skill work, someone who was in my corner exclusively. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, and I wasn't able to stick around. I did want to go to the NBA, and that was a non-negotiable with Chicago. But having Dorgy there and a little bit more of a culture, even within the two of us and some people who came and visited, made things a little bit easier.
So what was it like, you mentioned Chicago, what was it like walking through the doors of the Chicago Bulls? I mean, they were without a doubt at that time the biggest sporting franchise in the world.
Incredible. Past those 6 NBA championship trophies every morning and into the practice court where the banners hang. And some remnants of the teams who were a part of it. Obviously, a lot of players had left. Jordan had left, Pippen had left, Longley, Rodman, these players, but Tony Kukoc was still there, Will Perdue was still there, Randy Brown, Dickie Simpkins, these guys who had very little exposure, I suppose, or fanfare in the championships they were a part of, but was still still very much a fabric of part of the fabric of the club. So to hear them tell stories and to speak to the staff about what it was like and understand how those championship teams prepared was incredible.
So reflecting on your whole NBA career, so just still focusing on this time in the US, what stands out? I mean, to most Australians at the time, they look at some of the names you mentioned, your Michael Jordans and your Magic Johnsons, and to a large extent, you would have got an opportunity to play with and against some of these household names that we saw over here.
Yeah, I did, and it was incredible playing against those names. And the toughest for me was Shaquille O'Neal, but the question being what stands out was Steve Nash. And when I think of my 3 years in the NBA, I reflect back on having very first-hand exposure to how he went about his business and how he became the player he was, because when he came to the Dallas Mavericks, he struggled so much that he was booed every time he brought the ball down the floor, jeered every time he did things right or made a shot, which at the time wasn't as often as he would have liked. But the amount or the volume of training that Steve did, I always took pride in the fact that I trained as hard as anyone I knew. I just couldn't keep up with Steve. And he's got workouts online. Training had finished, he'd go another hour. Then he'd do yoga, he'd lift, he'd go and do another hour. Everyone's back in bed. But he went from being a third-string NBA point guard who came out of a small NC2A college to becoming the most valuable player in the NBA, which essentially made him the best player in the world. Now, that had nothing to do with strength, size, athleticism, skill. It was all down to the work rate that he had. And for me, you talk about my time in the NBA, Steve Nash is the first person I talk about almost every time.
Yeah, wow, amazing. What about the characters? I mean, there have been some characters in the NBA. We think of Dennis Rodman and Charles Barkley and all these sorts of guys. Well, you must have come across some pretty wild characters.
I did, and you get small glimpses of them. And Rodman was one that you hear a lot about and you see, and some of it's fabricated. He knows
as flamboyant on the court as off the court?
Yeah, he is, but behind closed doors, he's quite normal.
Yes.
He's still left of centre, but he has his normal moments. Shaquille O'Neal was like a big kid and always very welcoming of new players in the league, and in fact came down to Australia to launch the All-Star Cafe back in the day and was really embracing of the Melbourne Tigers and some of the younger players around at the time. And
fabulous.
There's footage around of him coming down and training with us. I played with Cedric Ceballos and Dennis Scott, who were both very flamboyant characters, and Dennis Scott's probably renowned for playing with Shaquille O'Neal and probably even spoke more than Shaquille O'Neal, but he was renowned for the parties that he held and the ability for him to stretch the floor for Shaq. But he had some interesting stories, and outside of that, I mean, the best player, alongside Steve that I played with was Dirk Nowitzki, and he had never played a Division I professional league before he got drafted, and very much the same story.
Wow.
Struggled his first couple of years and will become maybe the 5th highest scorer in NBA history sometime soon. And just another incredible story that really stands out.
Yeah. Okay. So as your NBA career drew to a close, first you came back, I think, and spent some time with the Victoria Titans?
I did. I came back to play in the Olympic Games. So the Chicago Bulls wanted me to stay there in the off-season and work on my strength.
Yes.
Which was fantastic in theory, but they weren't prepared to guarantee me a contract. So what I didn't want to happen was for me to spend the entire off-season working on something I knew I needed, but missing out on both. So home Olympic Games in Sydney was too great a risk for me. It was something that I dreamt of doing. I'd never been to the Olympics before, and I had the chance to play in one in Australia. So I put my efforts into making that team and was able to do that. And had an amazing experience. What it did, though, it meant the end of my NBA career, which it may have been anyway.
Yes.
So I certainly don't regret the decision. If I'd been a better player or been a little bit more advanced, there may have been other teams who were interested as well.
Yes, okay. Standout memories from the Olympics? I mean, that was an amazing time in Australia.
The opening ceremony, clearly, just walking in as the host nation and 120,000 people just going nuts.
And a whole nation.
And they did. And we probably, as a basketball team, had an even more special moment. We were up near the front with Andrew Gaze being the flag bearer and making that role his own that year, waving it about and big grin on his face. So a really, really memorable moment.
Fabulous. But then it was over to Russia, and it's hard to imagine a greater contrast between the warmth, of the climatic warmth of Sydney in September 2000, all the way through then to Russia, where you moved over in winter, Russian winter?
Yeah, I did, just as it was coming into winter. So I got over there in October.
Wow.
And
what were the temperatures at that time?
Not quite zero, just in the pluses.
Right, okay.
So, I had a few offers after another Boomers trip and wasn't sure what I was doing. Chose Russia. Yeah, there are a few reasons, and I'm not going to lie, one of them was the biggest offer. It was, they were offering me the most money, but there was a part of me that just thought...
Curiosity.
There's no way I would have ended up ever going to Russia.
Yes.
It seemed like the most difficult place to go and live. It seemed like there'd be challenges in Russia that there might not exist, or that might not exist in other, Italy, Croatia, these nicer... places, and no Australian player had ever done it before. So I chose Russia, and I think within about 6 weeks I thought I'd chosen wrong because it was harder than what I'd expected. It was in a city called Perm, which was an industrial city, nearly a 2-hour flight east of Moscow, at the base of the Ural Mountains. So no one spoke English. By the time I was 6 weeks in, it was getting, it was dark until 10 in the morning, light until 4 in the afternoon, and really, really tricky. 2 trainings a day, none of the teammates spoke English, and probably the thing that not saved me, that sounds a little bit too over the top, but we signed one of my Dallas Mavericks teammates, Martin Mercer, who I'd become very close with, and he spoke Russian as well as English, and being Estonian. So he really helped me through the back end of that first season, just having someone to bounce off, someone to be able to communicate with. And we got to the end of that first season, had done very well. We made the finals of the European competition we played in. We made the Russian final, which was unexpected. Ended up losing to CSKA Moscow, which still is the biggest team in Russia. And got to the plane and swore I'd never come back. And it was
now, can I interrupt there? Plane flights in Russia are, by reputation, quite hair-raising?
Yeah, very much so. Walk up the back end stairs into the plane, hose with all the snow and the ice off the plane. No heating in many planes, so you wear your gloves, your hats, your big coats, and you kind of hope, one in every 5 or 6 flights you end up at a different airport because you can't land in the one that you're aiming at because of the snow and the ice. And then you wait for a few hours for a bus to drive you the 7 or 8 hours, so it was tricky.
And you're regularly flying around the country, so this is day-to-day life for Chris Anstey.
Yeah, we actually had the conversation one time that how long do you think you have to be in Russia for before your plane goes down? Which isn't the best conversation to have on a plane.
Not the ideal conversation.
But it was quite frequent. And you kind of look out the window sometimes and think, would anyone even find you if you did? So I got a little bit hairy at times. There were some big bounces up there, and a few times we really had to hang on.
Wow.
But we got out of there. And like I said, after that first year, you get home, you think, God, that was fantastic. I'm not going back. And it was actually Martin who called me a couple of months later and he says, do you want to come back?
I was going to say, because actually you did come back.
Yeah, and switch clubs. So he said, I've moved across to Unix in Kazan. I said, congratulations. He said, they're interested in seeing if they can get you. And I said, no, I'm not coming back.
You're a sucker for punishment.
Well, they said, there's a good offer.
Yes.
I said, no. Yeah. I said, look, have them call me. I kept saying no, and they kept upping the price till eventually I said, oh, all right. It was just ridiculous to say no to that sort of an offer.
Yes.
And Kazan was a better living environment than what Perm was. The club was more professional. I was acclimatised at some level to it, so it was easier to get through because I was coming in eyes wide open.
But still away from the family and friends.
Yeah, look, they came over every now and again. Had my family come over for a few months at a time.
Yes.
Had some good friends come and visit, which is a big effort to get to there and spend a few weeks. And was very, very thankful for the friends who came over. But another successful year, and that brought me back for my third.
Wow.
So by the time I got to the third, though, my daughter was just coming into kindergarten, and I came home middle of the year, and there was 1 week left of kinder, and there are no kids over there that speak English, so she was getting a little bit isolated. And had a little son as well, and the difference in my daughter after 1 week of kindergarten, just being able to interact with other children and be in the sun, even though it was winter here, it was still warm. For me, I couldn't take her out of that again. She had to develop, and I'd been on the phone to Al Westover, who was the assistant coach of the Melbourne Tigers at the time, and there was some talk about him becoming head coach, and I almost came home the year before, but didn't, and then he got the job, and I remember just getting home and saying, let's do this.
Yes.
I don't want to leave again.
Yes.
And had that became a great decision as well. My kids went through school in Melbourne. I loved being back, playing in front of my friends and family, and reconnecting after having been away sort of 7 of 9 years. And there was just a joy in playing and sharing what I did well with people who I cared about, and having them share the journey, and just getting back into that circle of friends again. There's a little bit of, I suppose, jealousy. You have the people who have the annual holidays and the long weekend breaks, and you miss out on those sort of things. So trying to find my way back into that sort of routine was fun.
I keep hearing this theme in everything you're saying. In your experiences in the United States, you were talking about, not feeling like there were people in your corner. In Russia, you talked about the isolation, how great it was to have people coming over and being with you. And now I'm hearing you in Australia, you're saying the great thing is I'm back playing in front of my family and friends. It seems like being part of something, being part of the team, which was something you even talked about you first, seems to be very important to you.
Yeah, it does. And there was a moment in Russia we won at Kazan. We won Russia's first ever European Championship in any sport since it had been introduced to or accepted into the EU and able to compete.
Wow.
Which was a huge achievement.
Huge for the town. Yeah.
And we finished the game. We went out and had our party. And it was a Wednesday night game. We didn't have a game that
Russians
weekend.
are famous for their parties too.
Yeah, they are, yes. And I got home at whatever crazy hour in the morning and looked around the apartment. I was by myself. And who do I tell?
Yes.
No one even knew. And that was a bit of a moment where I thought, wouldn't it be great to be able to share that with some people and celebrate with them, or even have slightly better relationships with your teammates that at least spoke English. So that was something. That was a moment I always remember. But yeah, look, coming back to the Tigers and being able to tie together the great experience I'd had at the Magic, what I'd learnt and seen in the NBA, how I probably felt I was able to operate without my support crew around me in Russia, and tie that back into the player I hope to become. Probably put me in a position where I was able to then think about a leadership role, and was offered the captaincy of the Melbourne Tigers, which I didn't want because I never saw myself or aspired to be a leader. But
it's funny because most who know you would say that's a role that you seem to fill very naturally.
Yeah, it is, and I think that there's a step that most leaders, or most people who want to be leaders, forget, and that's the ability to follow and to follow the right people. And I was very fortunate to follow the right people for a lot of years and develop my philosophy slowly over my journey. And I was 30 years old when I came home, so I had quite a lot of experience under my belt. And it was interesting. We'd sit around a team lunch or dinner, and the guys would ask stories, and I'd tell them about Steve Nash, and I'd tell them about Russia, or I'd tell them about something that happened in Spain, and they seemed interested. And that led into training, and that led into preparation, and it led into diet and all these sort of things, and they got more and more interested. But I suppose the biggest thing was even the exposure to some of the best players in the world. Again, I like to pride myself on working as hard as anyone else, and that was something I tried to introduce to the Tigers, who weren't renowned for the Sydney Kings, or back in the day the Southeast Melbourne Magic work rate. And it was something I wanted to change in the culture, and was something we were able to do. But that took everyone buying in, and those championships and the 2 years we made the championship series and lost were 4 fantastic years. And I put them on a par with the Southeast Melbourne years from a completely different perspective. Had a bigger role individually, had a leadership role, but yeah, they were special years.
Describe yourself as a leader.
Hopefully inclusive.
You talked about leading, following first. I think you said following first as a
being strong in what you believe in, being strong in philosophy, but understanding people. I think leadership's more personality driven than skill driven. You could have the best messages if no one's following and no one's listening, then they're wasted. So there's got to be an empathy for the people around you, and by no means did I consider myself to be great at that when I played, and I think any leader probably still always looks for ways to improve. But certainly you want to get to know people, and to reflect back on Brian Goorjian, we were around with some of the Southeast Melbourne Magic teammates recently, and we're having a conversation about what made Brian great. And we got to a stage in the conversation where I sort of said, look, it was a little bit different for me though, because I was his favourite. And then Andrew Parkinson said, no, I was his favourite. And Sam McKinnon said, no, I was his favourite. And we went around the team, and everyone
thought they were his favourite.
And we looked around and said, how do you do that?
Yeah.
But he just created this relationship with every player away from basketball, where when it then came back to basketball and he asked us to do something we'd never been able to do before, or to go to a level we'd never been, we'd do it for him. For another coach, we may not have been able to do that, but it was always the person first, the athlete second.
Yeah, okay. What are you most proud of in your playing career?
I think I found out how good I could be. And I think a lot of people go through life without understanding what they're capable of doing because they're not prepared to explore that. They're too comfortable being comfortable, and I was very, very uncomfortable for a number of years, but that helped me develop into the player that was in me. And I didn't start the game until late.
But you left nothing in the sheds.
I hope not.
Yeah.
I hope not.
Fabulous. If anyone who can say that would be happy. After your playing career, it was coaching. Now you've had quite an exposure to coaching as well over the journey. So you coached at Caulfield Grammar, Camberwell Dragons,
all the big clubs,
Melbourne Tigers, or Melbourne United.
A little bit of
both
yep.
franchises. Yeah, must have given you a different perspective on the game.
Yeah, it did, and it was easier coaching, obviously Camberwell and Caulfield, because you come in at a position of strength. They're younger, they haven't had exposure to some of the messages, and they feel that they can learn. Coming into the Melbourne Tigers and being offered that job again was a job you just couldn't say no to. The difficulty was there was still a crossover of players who knew me as a player, knew my flaws, knew my weaknesses, and not that that's a bad thing, but some of the messaging wasn't aligned with what I was actually able to do as a player. And I was still developing my philosophy. And at the end of year review every year, I'd sit down and say, look, the improvement in this team is going to come as much from me becoming a better coach as it will from the crew. But what we needed, was consistency and continuity. We couldn't just keep turning the team over and over, and that was a battle we weren't able to win. And I was very proud of the fact that we only missed the finals by one free throw our first year, and that was a team who hadn't been in the finals for the 4 years previous, and the next year we made the semi-finals, won a game in there, and lost a game 3 in Adelaide. So, one game off the championship series, and we're very proud of that. I thought we were moving in the right direction, and then that's when the change happened. The Tigers became united, and there was an increased level of pressure to perform right now. And I think any coach will tell you that if you're coaching to win the game in front of you as opposed to building a program, it's a very, very different philosophy, and it's one that didn't suit me. I wasn't comfortable bringing players in and out. I wanted to develop people, develop players as Brian had. Not that I'm putting myself on that level by any stretch, but the owners and the management wanted instant success. It didn't happen, and one game in, they told me I wasn't the right guy for it, and they chose to go in a different direction. So
must have been tough.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
But you know what? I felt that I'd given a lot to the club, both as a player and obviously as a coach. And I hope that there was never any consideration that I hadn't given my best effort. I suppose the disappointing part after that was just being thrown to the side and never invited back.
Yes.
Which was probably the most disappointing thing out of all of it. But you learn lots, you move on, and I know that I'm a better coach now than what I was then. Probably a better person, having gone through the things I went through, than what I was then. And there may be another opportunity rise, but there's a great enjoyment in coaching younger athletes who still have somewhere to go. And if I look back, or if you ask most people their favourite coach or their favourite leader or mentor, most people will reflect on someone who they spent time with somewhere between 17 and 20 years old, because they're the formative years still of building habit and developing identity. So I really enjoy working with young athletes in that age bracket, because you really can influence habit and make a difference.
Now, we've had many chats over the years, Chris. We've covered, and coming through what you've talked about today, it's this same theme. I mean, the drive that you've had to be able to find in yourself in, from never having heard of basketball to suddenly you're in the NBL, to you're in the dog-eat-dog world of the NBA, suddenly you're in Russia. All these challenges that your career, your journey kept throwing at you, and then the coaching career. Where does this drive come from? Is it something you've formed? Is it something you were born with? Were you a crazily motivated young fella?
I think I was. Yeah. But the shorter answer is I'm not sure. I'm just who I am. I always hated losing as a player, and it drove me. It wasn't even so much the winning; it was the not losing.
That's interesting.
I never wanted to put myself in that position where I had to walk up and shake someone's hand at the end of the game, knowing that I wasn't as good as them, or knowing that outworked me. So I always had my little routines where I'd run home from games that we lost. If we went for a beer afterwards, I'd run home from the city. I used to race the school bus home in high school through the paddocks out at Sydenham, just because I felt like I was doing more and I was more prepared. And as you get towards the end of the end of my career, I found myself enjoying my younger teammates' successes as much as I enjoyed my own, and that was probably a bit of a light bulb moment that led me to believe that I might be interested in coaching, because I wanted to help these younger players experience some of the things I'd experienced as a player, and I had some of the tools to help them get there. So at the same time, and one guy that stands out to me is a guy named Tommy Greer, who became our captain when I coached at the Tigers, but he was a rookie the year I came back, and my motivation was always to beat him in sprints, to be there longer than him, because he was a hard-working, enthusiastic first-year player who would do anything.
A young buck.
To make the team.
Yeah.
And oftentimes over our careers we find ourselves getting more comfortable with the environment that we're in. And for me, I wanted to go back to being a 30-year-old rookie, if you like, and would always compete against Tommy in the runs. I'd compete against our best shooter, Daryl Coletto, in the shooting games. And
are you allowed to tell us if you beat them?
Of course I beat them, because they're not on camera.
We'll get them in next time.
But yes, but I did. Even the shooting games with Daz after training, I hated losing to him.
Yeah.
I hated when someone beat me in a sprint, and I'd go away and do everything I can to be better next time. I think that's it. If so many athletes in particular are happy with where they're at and not willing to improve, and I was never happy where I was. And even when I retired and I look back at film now,
you still look at, why didn't I?
Yeah, absolutely. You look back at film, really? I wish I hadn't have seen that again, because I thought I played well that game. Yeah. So I think it's just that drive to continually get better at whatever I do.
In this journey, is there a moment that you can look at and you say, that was my low point? I was most intimidated then. Was it, running onto the court against Michael Jordan? Was it looking out of the window in Perm? Was it, what was it in that whole journey?
There are a lot of low points, and there are a lot in Perm.
Yeah.
Probably the one, though, was missing the Athens Olympics through injury, because I had no control over that. And it was reasonably close to the Olympic Games, and I was out. And as supportive as I would have loved to have been and was internally, I couldn't watch. I didn't watch a minute of the Olympic Games because I should have been there in my head. And I suppose that was something that had really driven me. That was a goal that I had, and I missed it. And it also drove me to come back afterwards a better player, but that one hurt.
Yeah. They don't come around too often, do
no,
they?
they don't.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah.
And that would have been a really special moment, and the group that they took over was a special group. So they're probably the two.
Yeah, okay. We'll finish up now. We've got the nifty 9 questions, Chris, so I'm going to give them to you fast. You give me the answers fast. Let's see how we go. What's your favourite nickname?
See, I've never had one.
Chris Anstey.
I've never really had one.
What did they call you in the States?
They didn't call. No, they the Magic Boys called me Astrology, but that because there was some science to being me, because no one completely understood me.
Oh, there you go.
But that was one, but I haven't really ever had one.
Favourite sport beyond basketball?
Tennis.
I think you've answered that one. Yep. Personal hero?
Roger Federer.
Present company accepted.
Oh, sorry. Yes. And Roger Federer, clear second. Yes.
All right. Favourite band, musician?
Billy Joel.
Favourite movie?
Dumb and Dumber.
I was going to say, don't say Shawshank Redemption. All right. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Breakfast, lunch or dinner?
Dinner, clearly.
Favourite vacation destination?
The Cook Islands.
Most starstruck moment? Again, accepting the moment
Well,
here.
probably Roger Federer. Got to spend a fleeting moment of time in his company, and same age as me, a little bit younger. So someone I've always... And before that, it was John McEnroe, and I got to have a conversation with him, which was great. Okay.
Now, final question. You became Trobe Financial's company ambassador back in 2015. You had so many options. What drew you to Trobe Financial?
And I think the theme's consistent, the people. It really was the people, the culture, the knowledge that what Trobe Financial does, that they're leaders in industry, they're the best at what they do, and they're always striving to be better. The people who drive it I have a great deal of respect for, and our values aligned. And the CEO, Greg O'Neill's become a close personal friend of mine, and some of the conversations we've had in private are very similar to the conversation we're having now, where we've picked each other's brains, we realise the similarities between sport and business, and the relationship grew a long time before I became an ambassador. I suppose in 2015 the relationship became official, and it's been wonderful.
Well, fabulous. It's been wonderful for us too, Chris. So thank you very much for your time, Chris Anstey.
Anytime, Chris. Thanks, mate.
Thank you so much.